Hey everybody, it's Sean Gibbons from the Communications Network. Hope you are doing well on this leap day. Kind of crazy to think we ain't going to get here for another 4 years. But while we're here, we're very happy you're here. And as folks are coming into the room, would love it if you would just follow something. If you've been with us before, you know what I'm about to say. If not, well, it's on the slide. We're going to do what we call the two-word check-in. This is an idea that we borrowed from Professor Brene Brown, who's down at the University of Houston. And that is, as we go into the chat, and I guess I should do this myself, gang, so I can model it for everybody. Make sure, as I'm doing this, that you're talking to everyone. I think that'll give you that opportunity. Or you can talk to folks individually to say, hi, put in your name, in where you are, and then how you're feeling, just in 2 words. And folks are beating me to it. Look at this. Dale, Jess, how's it going? Grace. Everybody else, go ahead. I know you're probably still typing, but go ahead and throw that in here. It's a good chance for us to see who was in the room with us. Hey, Margaret. Hey, Aaron. Hey, Steve. Hey, Dan. Oh, my goodness, this is going fast. Jess, Benjamin. Hey, Beth. Gina, Mary, Daniela. Oh, my goodness. Okay, I got to quit. But suffice to say, as you can see, there's quite a few of us. We're grateful you're all here. I'm going to yak at you for just a quick minute, tell you a couple quick things we got cooking in addition to today's webinar. And I hope, obviously, y'all know this, as you're chatting, you can talk to one another, you can send direct messages. And given what we're going to talk about, gang, I hope you'll be in the chat throughout the hour sharing your reactions to some of the information we're going to be sharing with you. All right, so with that, my partner in crime, Kareem, if you don't mind, sir, let's go ahead and go forward to the next slide. This is something I hope you all know. For those of you who are network members, I sure hope you're taking advantage of this. Last January, we launched Network Slack. The idea was basically, what would it look like if we created a space that could connect all the folks working in comms for good all the time from anywhere? And so that's what this is. To our great surprise, about 2,100 folks have joined this thing since we launched it. Now, we were thinking when this started, it's about 3,000 network members. We were thinking most people, year one of a new thing, maybe 10% of the community would kick the tires on this platform. If I can speak today, gang, sorry about that. But the reality is over 2,000 folks. It'll be even better if you're not there, if you come join us, because that's how we get smarter and better, is just by building a bigger brain, bigger hive mind. So you're welcome to join us. It's something for network members only. It's one thing I do need to flag. With that, Mr. K, take us forward. If you are a network member and you're part of Slack, maybe you're also part of this. This is another program we're real proud of. And we're about to welcome somebody onto the team to help us do this even better and expand it a little bit more. But this is this Circles program we've been running. And you can see a link in here to get a little bit more information on what it's all about. But the basic conceit is we all need someone we can lean on. Mick leans on Keith, Keith leans on, well, we won't even go there. But suffice to say, we all need someone we can lean on. And that's what Circles is all about. It's about giving you that kitchen cabinet of folks who maybe work on your issue, or they share a role that you have, or maybe they share an identity. So welcome to check that out. And everybody who's a network member is eligible to participate. So we're happy to have you. Mr. K, if you would, let's go forward. This Locals program, again, is something hopefully you all know about, and that is, it's a really good idea to get to know your neighbors. And so we have local groups gathering around the country. You might be able to, if you're good at geography, figure out where all these little dots are on the map. But even better, let's tell you what's cooking. Why don't we go ahead, Kareem, if you would. We have our friends in Chicago. They're coming up in just about a week's time. It's crazy to think we're already into March. But these lovely faces, if you know them and you live in the Chicagoland area, please come hang out with them. They're actually going to be talking about disinformation. Should be a fascinating session. I think they're bringing in some people from Northwestern and elsewhere. Should be really interesting. Check that out. I think we put a link into the chat for folks who might want to RSVP. And by the way, these local groups, unlike Circles and unlike the Slack, these are free and open to all. If you work in comms for good, if you're a foundation, nonprofit person, maybe working in municipal government or state government, or maybe you're a consultant who tends to focus on foundation and nonprofit social sector work, you are welcome here. So we'd love to see you. Let's go forward. Next city, Portland, out there on the Oregon side, not Maine, for those folks who might be confused. They're actually going to do something super cool and kind. They're going to go out as a group and plant trees. That's going to be happening just a couple of days after Chicago. That's March 9th. See the link in there. If you live out in that area by the lovely Columbia River Gorge, by all means, check them out. All right, let's go forward. One more. I think we have two more here. Denver. Again, nice to be in the mountains right about now. I think they've got a lot of snow, but they will have dug out by March the 13th, and you can go gather with them if you'd like. Let's go forward if we can. Denver people, always a good time, and one we're really excited about. We were all down in Atlanta last year for ComNet 23, and a couple of our friends decided to put a tail on the donkey and say, let's start a local group and make sure that we continue the conversation amongst all our friends living in the Atlanta metro area. And so March 14th, I guess it's about 2 weeks out, they'll be gathering. And so we would welcome and be very enthusiastic about seeing all y'all there. So with that, think we have a couple more quick slides and then we'll get into this. This is just a promise we made to you all. Maybe you saw this if you're a network member. We published this. These are the goals that we're going to be getting after over the next, oh goodness, I guess now we're down to 10 months. But suffice to say, please hold us accountable. This is all the good things that we're aiming to do for all of you. And we're very, very excited about it. Hopefully you see some stuff in here that makes you feel good, makes you feel excited, and we will be welcoming your help as we're doing all this stuff. So keep an ear out for opportunities to participate with us. All right, one more. And I think you might be able to tell just, I'm not actually 45, I'm afraid a little bit older, but the network turns 45 this year. And so just wanted to flag that for everybody. We're going to be doing a few things to mark the occasion of a very beautiful thing, which was a guy who was stuck first day at his job, stayed that way for a couple days, and then eventually had the courage and good fortune to reach out and call a colleague who took him out to lunch. And that was the beginning of the communications network. And we'll talk to you a little bit more about some of the early stories and some of the things we all experienced over the last 45 years. Really, really excited about the next 45 years. One more thing, and then I know I got to shut up, and that is Kansas City. If you have not yet sent in a proposal for us, we're going to be gathering in October. And by April, oh goodness, where are we saying? I think April 5th, we have to have a proposal in now. So you can register or you can submit a proposal. Either way, you'll see that link right there. We would be delighted to have you. Another thing for nominations, and that is the Clarence B. Jones Impact Award. Hopefully, maybe you all saw Dr. Jones if you were watching the Super Bowl. He was actually in a Super Bowl ad. But the Jones Award is an opportunity for all of us. It's in his name, but the goal of this is to lift up and honor, celebrate an organization, a foundation, or nonprofit that done something extraordinary using communications as kind of the key driver of that change, the key strategic lever. And so we want to learn what those are, so we can learn from all of them. Last year, we had our friends from Whistleblower Aid win the award, and some wonderful organizations over the years, the Truth Initiative, United We Dream, and others. You can learn about all those at jonesaward.org, and we welcome you making a nomination as well. All right, I think we are done. Nope, I got to get better at this. We have one more thing, and this is the Frank Carell Scholarship. So for those of you who are either maybe an academic or maybe you work at a nonprofit, but you don't have much of a professional development budget, and getting a ticket to come to ComNet might be a bit of a hardship, we got you. Or actually more precisely, our friends at the Rockefeller Foundation have made it possible for us to give away tickets. So if you qualify, it's a means tested thing, but if you have need, we want to help you out. And so between now and April 22nd, if you could, please go ahead and submit to become a Carell Scholar. We'd love to see you in Kansas City this fall. All right, I think one more, and that is telling you what's coming next. Kareem has done a fabulous job this year, so we actually kind of know all the webinars that are cooking into the end of the year. Eventually, we'll publish them, but for now, maybe you should just be aware. The next thing that's coming up is we're going to be talking about AI, and specifically Alyssa Miller, who's the newish CEO of a firm called Pluralytics. They're doing some kind of really great, over the horizon Star Trek stuff. And suffice to say, we'll get to learn a little bit from her about what they're learning, what their journey has been like, and how that might have some application or implications for all of us. All right, with that, I think I get to say thank you to Kenya, who has been miraculously keeping up with me while I've been running my yap this entire time. Thank you very much for the ASL services. If you have need, go ahead. We've got her pinned, so you should be able to see her. You can also turn on closed captioning. Not perfect, but it'll help if you have need. And with that, I have the great good fortune of handing this over to my friend and colleague, Anita Sharma. Anita's been working with us for the last couple of years on our DEI project and specifically helping to gauge how things are shifting over time. And that's what we're going to talk about for the next little while. And again, welcome you all weighing in the comments as we're underway. I really want to hear from you all. What resonates? What makes sense? What seems a little dissonant? What's working in your organization, or maybe some places you're getting stuck? All of it's good. We will have some time for questions at the end. And then as we always do, we'll have office hours. So we'll have an extra 30 minutes. If you have very specific questions or want to parse some data and go deep with us, we've got some time set aside for that. All right, with that, Anita, over to you.
Thank you. And I'm going to just, if you give me a moment, switch to presenting.
There we go.
And I am back again. Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you to everyone who's joined for this webinar. Happy Leap Day. I'm really excited to share the results of the latest DEI survey from the network with this group. It's a reminder, not just that data can be important and instructive, but it's a chance to assess the field over time, because this is a survey that the network has been running every other year since 2019. And my hope is that it's also a chance for all of you to take some findings back to your teams, to stakeholders at your organizations, and that the learnings are really actionable and practical to the extent that you're looking for some nudges or direction or ideas when it comes to incorporating DEI into all of your work. So with that, there we go. Just a little bit about the run of show and what I'm hoping to cover. I'll start with just a bit of background on this survey, when it started, why it started, a little bit about the methodology, and some key findings that I've organized into a few different categories. From there, I'll take you through some foundational information about what's happening within the organizations represented in this survey. And then the bulk of what I'm sharing is what I call DEI in practice. So the majority of questions in this survey really focuses on the intersection between DEI and communications work. So we'll get into that there. Finish off with some learning from the field, where folks are looking for resources on this topic as a way to hopefully inspire and help you navigate what's out there, and give a little tease to some of the resources that the Communications Network in particular has. And then lastly, I have a few takeaways at a higher altitude and some associated questions. These are really homework questions to have you take back to your organizations as you think through these findings, and again, applying them in your day-to-day work. And as Sean mentioned and encouraged, the chat in these webinars is super active. I've already seen it be pretty active, so I hope that keeps going. And I have a few distinct prompts throughout these slides where I will specifically ask you to react to some of the findings and how they actually relate to the work you're doing. So a little bit about this research. In 2019, so about 5 years ago, the network came together and realized that it would be helpful to have some baseline data about how organizations in the social good sector were thinking about DEI, if at all. And they wanted to ask some questions about the organizations represented by these communicators, but really dig into what's happening with comm strategy. And the survey has since been repeated in 2021 and 2023. I think that makes it a biennial survey. The network distributed the same survey. And the goal there was really to say, okay, where have we made progress? Where are we falling short? Are we starting to see some trends? You know, a single data point is just a data point, but when you have two data points or three, you start to see some potential trends. And the network plans to distribute this again in 2025. So again, we will continue to track what's happening in this space across the sector. Just a quick bit on methodology for those who are interested. The network distributed the survey to its members. That email encouraged not just their own participation, but to have them share it on with other communicators in their professional network, something called the snowball distribution attempt to just try and get as many communicators to weigh in about what's happening. Where possible, I make or call out when differences over time are significant. There are places where you may see one number looks higher than another, but I don't actually say it's a significant difference just because it wasn't based on sample sizes and what those numbers actually were. There are other places where there's clearly directionally something happening. The change is not significant yet, but I do try to call that out as well. And with that, I just want to start by talking about some of what I'm calling advances. And here we see organizations really looking inward as they consider DEI, and they're adopting and applying some of these principles. There we have a question that I'll get to later about success stories around DEI, either that you've seen at other organizations and within your organizations. And interestingly, nearly all the responses there were about their own examples, what they were seeing within their organizations. And second, we see quite a jump since 2021 in organizations having processes to speak out about current DEI issues, and that's a noticeable trend. And then really importantly, there seem to be fewer barriers to applying DEI in the work that all of you are doing. We ask about very specific barriers, and across the board, we just see a drop, a little bit from 2019 to 2021, and now just far fewer barriers seem to be in play for those who are able to apply DEI to their work. In the second category, which I call steady state, progress, we ask a question about perceived proportion of people of color on staff, on leadership, and board members. And we see a stepwise increase since we first started asking the question. We continue to see a coalescing around definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There seems to be more organizational buy-in to actually incorporate DEI into communications work. And then there's an upward trend in DEI in practice, and this is across different categories of communications, public communications, crisis comms, messaging. And then there's also the stagnation category. At the start of this year and even to this week, there's been quite a bit of coverage about DEI within the corporate sector. There's been quite a bit of waning, if not stalling out, and we're seeing some of that extensible to the social good sector as well, where the data, 3 times over now looks pretty comparable. And so one area where we see that is there's still a decent number of organizations without a clear articulation of DEI goals and values. We see a similar number of communicators who say they themselves are unsure if they actually have a strong grasp of DEI concepts. There's about 1 in 4 who haven't been able to explicitly apply DEI in their comm strategies. And we're starting to see some plateauing of how DEI plays out in specific tactical efforts too. Lastly, and of continued concern, is that the majority of communicators are still observing people they recognize as well-intentioned create or reinforce racist and harmful narratives in their own work. And so, when we do this again in 2025, I'll be looking across, all of these to see what actually continues to wane. Do we still see steady state progress? But this is a snapshot of where the sector is now. Moving into some of the organizational foundations of DEI, as I mentioned, we asked a question about racial diversity across different groups, staff, senior leadership, and boards of directors. And the question specifically asked people to estimate what proportion of people of color there were across staff, senior leadership, and boards. And so this data isn't based on actual headcount, but what people are self-reporting to be the average of racial diversity. So the data for this to the left is around staff, and this is where we're seeing this stepwise increase, right? Steady state progress, where the first time we fielded the survey in 2019, people estimated that on average 33% of their staff were people of color. We now see that to be 40% in the most recent cycle of the survey. We see a similar growth in senior leadership. And where there's the biggest jump of a 10-point jump between 2019 and now is really with boards. It went from approximately 1 in 4 individuals on boards of the organizations represented were people of color to over a third at this point. Before we went any further, though, we also wanted to say, okay, what are your definitions of diversity? This question specifically asked about racial diversity, but the survey is anchored by these 3 concepts: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we asked people to define them for us. And most of the definitions of diversity tended to talk about diversity of identity. Fewer expanded to include diversity of thought or perspective. This is pretty consistent year over year. So a quote that is illustrative of really focusing on identity and maybe at the margins expanding is this one: psychological, physical, and social differences that occur among any and all individuals, including but not limited to race, ethnicity, nationality, religion, and so forth. For equity, those definitions really are centered around fairness and fair treatment, giving opportunities, removing obstacles for those who have historically experienced barriers. So a quote here is, "For true equity, we must acknowledge the inherent uneven field and systemic barriers in our society. Our work is to address those barriers to access so that the unique needs of individuals are met and communities can thrive." And finally, belonging is really the most common word that appears in definitions of inclusion. It's creating a sense of belonging, which is done by welcoming and valuing everyone. To a lesser extent, some of the definitions that people shared focused on inclusion for traditionally excluded groups. Inclusion supports the power and agency of underrepresented people by focusing on the behaviors and practices that allow people to fully participate and bring their whole selves into a space without having to assimilate or acculturate. So the next slide is, as I mentioned, just a specific prompt for the chat. I'm curious to know how these definitions compare to your own understanding of those three concepts, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to how these terms are understood or articulated at your own organizations. And speaking of that, we also wanted to know if the organizations that the communicators work for had actually articulated their DEI values and goals. And this is one of those places where we're seeing stagnation. Year over year, it's about the same number of organizations that have articulated DEI values or goals. It's been about 6 in 10 since we started the survey. And as I was reflecting on the slide this morning, this is a potential opportunity for communicators, for all of you. If you're part of an organization that tends to be, that hasn't or is unsure about having DEI values or goals, can you step in there to really formalize that or help formalize that for your organization? Because it really does seem to be a foundational component of them being able to apply DEI in everyday work. And that's where I want to turn to now, which is DEI in practice. What does it actually look like for communicators like yourself to bring DEI into the everyday responsibilities and communications function as a whole? First, though, we wanted and continue to track how well communicators feel they understand DEI concepts. And this is one of the places where we really have seen progress since the survey was first fielded in 2019. So at that point, 43%, that lighter blue bar on the far left, said that they had a strong understanding of DEI concepts. We had, just under half that said they weren't sure. As we move now into 2023, we've seen a 20-point jump. Over half now actually say yes, they feel like they have a strong grasp of these concepts, which is fantastic movement. And a drop in those who are unsure. There's still work to be done there, but shared understanding of these concepts is one step along the process to actually being able to apply them in your work. Another place where we saw progress is around communicators feeling like they're actually supported and prepared to apply DEI in their day-to-day strategy and work. And this time around, we see fewer saying that they feel unsupported or ill-prepared. So again, starting on the left, we had a third who reported that, yes, they feel supported and prepared when we first asked this question 5 years ago. More recently, though, that has jumped to 43% and only 14%, right? There's still some people who are lacking support, but that number has really dropped, which is important, I think, for the field and for all of you doing this work. Then thinking about the actual application in the work that you're doing, 2/3 report that DEI is an explicit part of communication strategies at your organization. And that has remained pretty consistent over time, but where we're seeing progress more notably is actually the application of DEI into specific categories of communications. And so we looked at 5 categories of communications: public communications, internal comms, advocacy messages, donor messages, and crisis communications. And this question wanted to understand the extent to which there has been at least some operationalization of DEI. And it's by and large, the vast majority have been able to incorporate DEI in all of these categories. It is most common in public and internal comms, less common in crisis communications, but still nearly 3 in 4 are able to think about incorporating DEI in crisis comms. So I'll take you through what this looks like in each of these categories and how it's changed over time. There are a lot of numbers on this slide and the next 4. What I really want to draw your attention to is the orange bars. And so the scale is not at all to full operationalization of DEI across each of these communication categories. And what we see in public communications, but consistently in all 5 categories, is that there is a shrinking of that orange bar since we first started exploring this question. In 2019, 1 in 5 weren't applying DEI to public comms. That's now halved to just 1 in 10. And, full operation, this word is always tough for me, full operationalization of DEI concepts can be somewhat of an elusive goal. There's an evolution of these concepts, right? And the conversation is fluid, but it's really good to see that for most communicators, they've been able to take DEI and incorporate it to at least some extent, if not many of the principles in public communications work. The same proves true when it comes to internal comms. Again, we're tracking that orange bar as we start on the left and move up. It's a similar decrease over the 3 cycles we've been doing this survey, and we see that DEI principles are really applied to internal communications as well. Progress with advocacy communications tends to be a little bit slower, but again, it's directionally positive. So we want to see the majority of people represented by these middle bars, where some or many of the principles are in place. And again, we're seeing more and more communicators, little by little over a year, being able to take DEI and think about advocacy messaging, and as well as donor and fundraising messaging. This is a place where I wanted to call out the bar second to the right, which is that many of the principles have been operationalized. So in donor messaging, a third say that compared to 20% in 2019, that they have been able to apply DEI here. And then again, crisis comms look like the laggard compared to the other categories, right? But the orange bar here, the orange bar story, I should say, is pretty dramatic, right? In 2019, the majority said no, they weren't actually applying DEI into crisis comms, and now it's dropped to 28%. So communicators are increasingly able to bring DEI principles into crisis comms as well. Now, thinking about specific tactics, we asked about a range of tactics and whether or not communicators were able to actively consider DEI when it related to any of these tactics. And year over year, we see that visual imagery is at the top of the list. It's the most common instance where DEI is considered in communications planning. In a second tier, stereotypes and generalizations. The place where we see the biggest jump between 2019 and now is really in that last row, which is cultural appropriation of concepts, messages, and word choice. Just under half were thinking about DEI here in 2019. Jumped to 60% or just about this time around. And then same question, but these are the tactics where we see that half or less are actively considering DEI in these parts of their work. So there's still opportunities for people to apply DEI concepts or apply specific equity frameworks to things like communication preference or messenger selection, and offering communications in multiple languages. Some of these may run up against bandwidth issues, resource issues, things like that. But there is definitely a tiering between the tactics on the previous slide and these where, since we started doing this survey, we have found that it's far less common for DEI to be applied here. This is what I thought was a great illustrative quote of tactically how people were thinking about DEI, but then also with a specific outcome in mind. We try to show, rather than tell, as much as possible the gender and racial diversity of our grantees to make it clear to others that they belong and they should apply. So again, I see a lot of chatter, but if you haven't already shared, I'm interested in knowing how you're able to apply DEI into some of your team's work. Are there categories of tactics or specific functional responsibilities that you didn't see reflected in those last few slides that we should be thinking about, where you are incorporating DEI principles, and maybe that's something that the network considers going forward? As I mentioned at the beginning, one of the places where we see quite a jump from 2021, so more recently in particular, is the number of communicators who say their organizations have a process for speaking out on DEI issues that align directly with their mission. It's just under half now, up from 33% in 2021. So what that looks like over time is we wanted to know to what extent essentially organizations had a clearly defined process for determining if, when, and how to speak on current DEI issues. And some examples that we gave of those are represented in that box on the far right. And if you start on the left-hand side, 13% in 2019 said, yes, we have a defined process. 47% said no. 40% said they only speak out on issues aligned directly with their mission. We see a pretty big jump in no in 2021, which could have just been something anomalous in the data, or coming out of the murder of George Floyd the previous year, there was just more of a focus on it, and people were actually more explicit about realizing, yeah, yay or nay, I do have a defined process. But coming down to 2023, that orange bar, the 48% say we only speak out on issues that align directly with our mission, is progress to point out, right? Because in 2021, it was only a third, and now there has been some formalization, most likely because of the likes of communicators like yourself to actually decide when to speak out. And talking through these findings recently with Sean, there's probably very few organizations that would say yes to the darker blue bar. We speak out on all issues. Like it's not that surprising that number is pretty low. And then on the whole, communicators are facing fewer barriers to applying DEI than in years past. And so what you'll see on the left side of this table are very specific barriers that we had heard people are facing. And, in 2019, there were quite a few barriers where half or more said that these were really getting in the way of them being able to apply DEI into communications work. But as you move to the right of the table, what was so incredible to me is that this past cycle of the survey, none of these barriers rise above 40%, right? So whether it's because they've been able to get buy-in from stakeholders, there's just some organizational momentum around this, or other variables in play, but most of these barriers are just less common. People are still facing them, and that's important to note. But on the whole, the barriers that were once in the way seem to be coming down slowly. This is a continuation of that table, but I think it's important to show because one of the options was around lack of support from their own organization, that in itself being a barrier. So we're seeing overall progress on breaking down of barriers and the ability of communicators to apply DEI to their work. Year over year, it's pretty much the same number. 1 in 5 continue to say they lack support from their organization, and that being among the most significant barriers they face. I know, just again, bringing in the conversation that's been in play with the corporate sector, political headwinds have felt stronger. That's often created new or perpetuated some resistance that people have felt. But there could be other factors that have kept this number pretty consistent year over year as well. And just putting this all together, among those represented today, how supported do you feel, as comfortable as you are to share among this group? How do you feel about applying these efforts? And do you feel like you have the support you needed, the resources that you need, and so forth? There are a number of frameworks that we know communicators can use to to apply to equity work and to specifically messaging, among other, and visual imagery selection. And we wanted to understand, which of the frameworks were actually most commonly used. And year over year, it's pretty consistent. Asset framing is the most common. It was in 2019 when we started this initiative, and it remains so in 2023. To a lesser extent, we see the racial equity framework and the multicultural frame are also being used, and the other couple are far less common. And as a reminder, asset framing is this effort to shift narratives so that people are defined by aspirations and assets. In terms of what's effective, where people have seen tactics that actually are contributing to breakthroughs in the need for racial equity, again, we're seeing the same tactic by a wide margin this time actually be the most effective. It's story-driven messaging. This year, 8 in 10 say that this is the most effective way to actually help make the case for racial equity. The place where we do see a shift, however, is messenger selection. So that is that, I guess, cobalty blue is what it looks like on my slide, but it's the bar second to the right among the cluster of bars. In 2019, over half said that messenger selection was a successful tactic here. That's now dropped 29%. And unfortunately, we don't necessarily know why we've seen that drop in the data, but it was noticeable to me. And again, is it the story-driven messaging just tends to be so effective that people default to it? Are there other factors in play that have shown this drop in messenger selection? And then this is, again, one of those places that I put in the stagnation category, where we're asking communicators to observe the field and say, are you noticing well-intended communicators, whether it be through imagery or messaging, actually creating or perpetuating stereotypes, biases, or racist narratives? And directionally, we're moving down, and so that is good. But still, over half, 62%, are doing this, which is, again, as communicators, how can we support the field as a whole? How can we model through the work we're doing a better, more inclusive, aspirational way forward? And then finally, learnings from the field. Where are people looking to learn more about these concepts, to find tips or guides or blueprints for incorporating into this work? And what are some of the ways that people have been successful in this work? So I'm only showing data here from this last survey because it's pretty consistent year over year. But in terms of the sources people are looking for, the ones that they trust for DEI information, there are 3 that rise to the top. The first is organizations specifically focused on racial equity or individual consultants. The second is a derivative of that, but just external trainings or consultants or experts, but maybe with a broader focus. And then similarly, the communications network. Calling that one out, again, I'll hand it over to Sean at the end of these slides so he can share some of those great resources. But the communications network continues to have a dynamic and deep hub of information. And then I wanted to end on what I thought was that really positive note of people sharing examples of their organizations really looking inward as success stories about DEI communications. And the stories that people shared really fell into 3 categories. The first was around amplifying diverse voices within their own organizations. So whether it be having different and diverse writers within their own organizations be part of the stories that they share outwardly, or inviting others to be part of decision-making, we see that organizations are really being very deliberate about how they communicate internally and externally. An example of that is, as an organization, we are approaching DE&I from a different perspective than you see out there. While our demographics suggest that we are a very diverse organization, we are focusing on creating a sense of belonging and working on having staff participating in decision making. So again, the bolded text here harkens back to that definition of inclusivity, bringing everyone in and inviting them to be part of the conversation. The second category of success stories comes down to accountability. Again, both internal and external accountability. And these success stories focused on developing new reports or tracking metrics that they have made publicly available. And for some, these reports capture both the positive steps they're taking as well as missteps. There are quite a few organizations where communicators recognize the importance of saying, okay, this is the progress we've made, but we're also still struggling here, or we also could have done better here. And then internally, there were what I'm calling micro examples of ways to increase accountability and hold each other accountable. One suggestion was an equity moment at a weekly staff meeting. Again, it's a moment to share both progress and missteps in a really safe space, but also to be intentional about keeping that conversation going and making sure that their organization continues to have these principles be foundational, be part of their everyday work. And then the last category, oh wait, I have one more quote. This is a great quote, and again, is about external accountability. We created an annual DEI report as a complement to our annual report that tracks our progress on DEI goals and lifts up stories from our work. But that also names our shortcomings and explicitly states where we have been perpetrators of racism and caused harm. And then this final category of success stories around partnerships and engagement that lead to better internal processes and learnings. And so it is this combination of bringing in outside voices that help them reflect and learn and think about how to make DEI very practical in their own work, but then also internal deliberations to support that as well. We've had support from leadership and our program colleagues, which has helped us prioritize financial resources. After multiple years of addressing accessibility in videos and social media, we were able to make the financial case to hire an accessibility consultant when we set out to redesign our website earlier this year. So I'm going to leave you with what I called higher altitude takeaways, and then some questions that linger for me that I hope you can take back to your desks and your teams. The first is the sector continues to show that DEI is foundational and it's dynamic, but this doesn't prove true for everyone, right? So given what we're seeing in other sectors, there was just a report out this week about how within the publishing sector, specifically, DEI is waning. So how confident is this group that the sector and communicators in particular, as champions of that, can keep this moving forward? What do you think would slow some of the progress that we're seeing? And how do we help those that are lagging behind a bit, but seem hopeful about trying to incorporate this? How do we help them become more confident in applying these principles? Second, and this is across communication categories, we see that DEI principles are applied in public comms, internal comms, crisis comms, and messaging. How has your team been able to operationalize DEI across those efforts? Where does it feel harder? What would make it easier? Or is it about resources? Is it about leadership buy-in? Is it something else that we haven't really uncovered in this survey? And then in terms of tactics, visual imagery is still at the top of the list, and places where DEI is considered, and very few seem to report that image selection is a barrier to embracing DEI. So I'm wondering, where does your organization fit here? What are you thinking about when it comes to visual imagery? And how can the existing frameworks that we were asking about support efforts across DEI with some of these other tactics? Where do they fall short? And where do you want to see more progress at your own organizations? And with that, I'm going to turn it to Sean
All right, I
to,
get to come back in here. So
yes.
one of the things that we wanted to share with you all was obviously we're grateful to Anita and everybody who took time to fill out the survey. Uh, but we also know that it's not enough just to have the knowledge, it's how to apply a lot of this. So we created back in 2019 and we updated it last year. Kareem did a brilliant job of this. We updated Com Network DEI. And if you were to go to that site, what you're going to see here is this. We're showing you a little GIF of what it might look like. But among the things that you'll find here are obviously this year's survey, as well as data going back from 2021 and 2019. We also have, as you can see, these modules where you can actually, we call them tools, and you can literally use them as a way to audit your own organization, but to also think about ways in which DEI can be practiced or applied. Those principles and values can be applied in your work. So it's everything from outreach. How do you conduct outreach? How do you host events? How do you think about DEI as part of your work when you're doing thought leadership? In addition, as you can see here, there's a glossary that we've created. And then there's also going to be case studies, which I think we're going to go to that slide in a quick minute. You'll see several organizations were kind enough to share back with us how the journey that they've been on and what they've learned. In some cases, some really remarkable success. And in some cases, folks were very, very humble and clear that they have some work to do, but they were kind enough to share where they were headed and what they were learning along the way. Our hope is that all of these, in addition to that, we have some resources that are available. So not just the work that we've done, but we know that we're also sitting on top of a lot of other folks who've done really, really important and interesting work, and you can find access to a lot of those there as well. So we tried to make it a place where if you work in comms for good, you will find an opportunity to find something that may help you as you're moving forward, either make the case for or think about how you might be shifting some of the ways that you work. With that, we're going to take a little time for Q&A. I'm going to take responsibility for going into the Q&A box here. If y'all don't mind, put your questions in here, and then you can also vote for them. So if there are questions that you would like to see us get answered, we're going to take a little time here, and then we're going to go to office hours. So first question is from an anonymous attendee. Gang, always nice when you put your names in, but someone's asking, can you please define messenger selection? So I think this was one of the slides we had earlier on places where we were seeing a pretty significant shift over time. Anita, do you remember how you find that? And I don't think we actually, go ahead.
There wasn't an actual definition. Messenger selection showed up in a couple different places. It showed up, I think the last slide I showed it on was about places where people are seeing breakthroughs, but it was also among the tactics where people were considering DEI. I'll give my definition, and then Sean, feel free to elaborate on it. But
Sure.
but in across instances where we talk about messenger selection in the survey, it's about who is the voice of an organization for a particular message, or who, and it could be plural, right? Like, are you choosing different messengers for different audiences or not, for example?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think both publicly, internally, and then obviously across different sorts of products, communications products you might make, whether that's videos or written pieces or audio or whatever it might be. How are you thinking about and what's the process you're going to think who might be the principal voice or messenger there? That's sort of how we were thinking about that. And I think the delta between the storytelling piece and messenger selection is kind of interesting, but I'm not sure we have a great understanding of why that's happening yet. But I wonder if any of you, from your direct experience, what you could tell us if that's something you've bumped into. Going back to these questions, we've got a couple here. 3 votes for this one. Is there a correlation between actually, I can't say it either, operationalization and the diversity of organizational leadership, and then specifically the C-suite and the board? In other words, does it matter if the board and leadership are diverse or come from diverse backgrounds in order to see a real push towards operationalization? I don't know that we know that. I know we have seen obviously a jump, particularly at the board level. That was kind of stunning to us just in the span of a fairly short band of time, pretty profound shift of folks reporting that their boards had shifted in their composition. Has that translated? I actually think, well, you know what, Anita, you take a crack at this because you went deeper into the data, and then I'll give you kind of what my hunch is.
Yeah, unfortunately, just because of limitations with the sample size, it's not something we can say conclusively. I think it's an interesting hypothesis, but not something that I could with any confidence tell you yes or no. Again, both of those are trending upwards. They may just be on a similar pathway. That as an organization becomes more intentional about having a racially diverse leadership team and accordingly board of directors, that trickles down to the team, or is it is it from the ground up? I don't know. It can be a little bit of both, right? Like communicators and others within an organization are clamoring and leading the way, and as they are doing so, subtly or pretty boldly, it forces the need for leadership and board change. I mean, I could see it directionally going either way.
Yeah, I think it's hard to pin it down. I do think, that old line, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We've seen some tremendous cultural disruptions, obviously, over the last few years. I don't need to name them for you, but suffice to say, I think that's had a profound impact on people reassessing their strategic priorities and the way that they're focusing. So, um, I do agree with you, Anita. I think there's a lot of agency and a lot of power sitting inside comm shop. So I would hate for
Mhm.
folks to think, well, if I don't have buy-in from the board, this is a place where I need to wait. And I actually profoundly disagree with that assessment. I think it's actually your job as a leader. Leadership's an activity, it's not a role. It's your job to sort of bring this forward if this is something you believe deeply in. I think it's important in order to be, honestly, more effective in your work. Let's go for it. Let's see. How does an org's comms investment correlate with resulting DEI success? It's a great question. I just don't think
Great
that.
question.
Yeah, great question. I mean, presumably more money, more effective, more focus. I don't know that that's actually true. I don't know
I
that
don't
that's.
know, right? Like, again, it's a great question. The survey does not allow us to get at that in any way, because I could also see bigger organizations being more risk averse in some way, just because of leadership, right? But again, there's just not enough here for us to make a determination there.
And then Anita, maybe you remember this. Our friend Mary asks, do you have information on the dominant or subordinate frame? She's not familiar with that concept. I think we offer up a little definition. I think we have to go
Yeah,
back
give
to
me
the
one
slides to dig
sec
that up.
to pull
Yeah.
that up without pulling down, without going through and giving everyone
Yeah, Mary,
whiplash
more
on the.
broadly, and you can find all of this at the DEI site and in the survey. What you'll note is, and I'm sure several of our friends could happily welcome you to put this into the chat. There's several different sort of approaches that have emerged over the last, I guess, decade. And so sorry, just checking the chat there. And so, as a consequence, we're starting to try to measure what are some of those different approaches. And so you can see that definition. Anita, did you manage to find it?
We don't specifically offer definitions,
Okay,
so
gotcha.
I would say what you just
If you go on to
described
Com
is.
Network DEI, sorry, blind spot on our part, but suffice to say, we do define it on Com Network DEI, so you can find it there, Mary. And apologies for that. Thanks for the question. It's a good one. Can you remind us if this survey data predates affirmative action related to Supreme Court case and its resulting backlash? Oh, when we were out in the field, right? So, oh boy,
It
I
overlapped, right?
don't
Because the
remember
court,
our timing. Were we out in the
so
field when that Supreme Court decision came out? I want to say we were out in front of it, but I could be wrong because I know we were open for about 6 weeks there.
I think we were in the middle of it. The
We,
backlash, I think, has had a long tail though.
mhm,
So because we were in the middle of it, it's a great question too
it
about
is.
events, right? I think we started it before the court decision, the last cycle of court decisions came down.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, like we've asked the exact same questions over time. This is kind of emerging as a longitudinal study for us. So the questions we asked you all in 2019 and 2021 were the same that would show up in the survey in 2021. So entirely possible that that created a little bit of noise. But I think it's just hard to know. I mean, the interesting thing is I don't think I'd be very curious to know if it profoundly influenced some of the outcomes of the data. It could, but I don't think so. But it would be my best guess.